Before we dive into this chaos, drop a comment and tell me, where are you tuning in from? Maybe it's a sun-soaked suburb in California, a buzzing high-rise in Chicago, or a quiet farmhouse out in Kentucky. I love seeing just how far these Karen stories of drama and karma manage to reach. The sound of children's laughter floated across the backyard like music, bright and innocent. The air smelled of frosting and grilled burgers, of paper plates stacked high on the picnic table, and balloons tugging against their strings in the warm breeze. I stood at the edge of the lawn, watching my daughter Emily beam from her wheelchair, her party hat slipping to the side as she clapped her hands with pure delight. She was 7 years old, small for her age, but in that moment she radiated a joy so fierce it made every struggle worth it. The candles on her cake flickered as the children gathered around, voices rising in the sweet chaos of a birthday song. For a moment, everything was perfect. Then the shrill bark of Patricia's voice split the air. "What is this circus?" she sneered, her large frame marching across the grass as though she owned it. Her sister Cheryl lumbered just a step behind, her face twisted in the same permanent scowl. The two of them, both in their 40s, both dressed in garish neon vests stretched tight over cheap floral shirts, looked so out of place among the bright decorations that the whole scene soured instantly. Guests fell silent. Balloons trembled in the breeze. Emily's hands froze mid-clap. Patricia jabbed a finger at my daughter. "Wheelchairs aren't allowed on the lawn. You're tearing up the grass." Cheryl's lips curled into a thin smile, as though the words were a punchline to a private joke. "And that cake," she added, nodding toward the masterpiece of frosting and sprinkles I'd stayed up all night preparing, "doesn't meet HOA standards either. Too big, too messy." For a second, my brain refused to register what I was hearing. The kids looked around in confusion, their voices trailing off into awkward silence. Emily blinked, then gripped the armrest of her chair as though bracing for impact. My fists clenched. "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward. Patricia ignored me completely. With a sharp shove of her thick hand, she knocked the cake platter off the table. The cake hit the ground with a dull thud, frosting smearing against the white cloth I had laid to keep everything neat. Gasps erupted. My daughter's face collapsed into shock, then horror. And then Cheryl crouched down, plunging her hands into the soft layers of sponge and cream. She smashed her palms down, grinding the cake into the dirt. Patricia followed suit, grabbing handfuls and tossing them into the grass. The image seared itself into my mind. Bright frosting streaked across their fingers, crumbs scattering while balloons bobbed happily above them as if mocking the devastation. Children cried out. Emily's small voice trembled. "Daddy, my cake." I rushed forward, my heart hammering. "Stop this right now." Patricia straightened, frosting streaked across her vest, and laughed in my face. "These are the rules. You think you can just do whatever you want? Not in this neighborhood. Not while we're in charge." Cheryl smirked. "If your kid can't follow the rules, maybe this isn't the place for you." Their words didn't just sting. They ripped something open inside me, something raw and primal. I looked down at Emily, her party hat tilted, her eyes brimming with tears, hands covering her mouth as if trying to hide from the humiliation. She had waited all week for this. She had counted the days. And in seconds, these women had turned joy into ashes. I forced myself to breathe, to hold back the roar clawing at my throat. Around me, parents shifted uncomfortably. Some bent down to comfort their own children. Others whispered as though debating whether to leave. But no one moved to intervene. No one wanted to risk being the sisters' next target. Because this wasn't the first time. I had seen this before, months of it. Small humiliations that built into something unbearable. Patricia, standing at the edge of my driveway, yelling that Emily's toys cluttered the neighborhood. Cheryl, filing false complaints about noise every time Emily laughed too loudly in the yard. Their letters slipped under my door at night, claiming our holiday decorations violated HOA aesthetics. I had ignored them, endured them, telling myself not to give them the satisfaction. But this was different. This was my daughter. I crouched beside Emily, brushing frosting from the wheel of her chair. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, though the words felt like lies. Her small fingers gripped mine, trembling. She asked the question I had dreaded from the start, her voice barely audible over the rustle of balloons. "Daddy, why do they hate me?" My stomach dropped. I had no answer. Patricia's laugh cut through the air like glass. "Enjoy what's left of your party, but don't expect us to clean this mess." They turned as if nothing had happened, walking back across the grass with frosting smeared across their hands, their heavy steps leaving prints where the cake had already stained the ground. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My daughter's sobs filled the silence, her party guests standing frozen, their parents exchanging helpless glances. I felt the humiliation burn through me, not just for myself, but for her. The candles were still smoldering on broken fragments of cake, the smell of sugar now mixed with dirt. I stood slowly, every muscle taut. My voice came out low, steady, more dangerous than I'd ever heard it. "This ends here." The sisters didn't look back, but I knew they had heard me. I turned to the guests, forced a smile I didn't feel, and told them the party wasn't over. But in my chest, beneath the weight of my daughter's grief, something hardened. This wasn't about a ruined cake or a spoiled afternoon. It was about a line that had been crossed, one I could never ignore again. As I gathered the shards of frosting-stained paper plates, I replayed every insult, every smirk, every smug threat those women had ever delivered. They had humiliated my daughter in front of everyone she loved. They had mocked her disability as if it were a nuisance. And they believed they were untouchable, shielded by their fake authority and the fear they inspired in the neighborhood. But they were wrong. I carried the broken cake platter to the trash and met my daughter's eyes. She was still crying, but when she saw me watching her, she tried to force a smile, as if she didn't want me to hurt. That was all it took. The anger hardened into resolve. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken us. But as the laughter of Patricia and Cheryl faded into the distance, I knew something with absolute certainty. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. And I would make sure they paid for it. The wind tugged at the balloons, carrying the smell of frosting and dirt across the yard. Emily's small hand clutched mine tighter. I bent down, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Daddy's not going to let them get away with this." Her eyes widened, hopeful through the tears. "Promise." I promise. In that instant, the party no longer mattered. The ruined cake no longer mattered. What mattered was the vow I had just spoken aloud. And deep inside, I knew it wasn't just a promise to her. It was a declaration of war. The sisters thought they had written the ending to our day. But they had only written the beginning of theirs. And as the sun dipped lower behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across the torn-up lawn, I felt the story shifting. The air was heavy with something new, an unspoken tension, the calm before a storm. They had humiliated us for the last time. What they didn't know was that this time, I had a plan. The morning after Emily's ruined birthday party, the backyard still bore the scars of humiliation. Bits of frosting clung to the grass, ants already swarming the crushed remains. The balloons had deflated overnight, sagging like wilted flowers. I stood at the kitchen window, staring out, my coffee untouched. Emily was still asleep upstairs, and I dreaded the moment she would wake to remember everything that had happened. I told myself that today I would try to fix it. I would appeal to reason, however impossible that seemed. People like Patricia and Cheryl thrived on conflict. Maybe if I explained, if I spoke calmly, if I reminded them that this wasn't just about rules, but about a little girl, maybe they'd back off. It was a desperate hope, but one I clung to because the alternative, open war, felt too heavy to bear so soon. By noon, I found them where they always seemed to be, sitting on their porch 2 houses down, glaring at anyone who dared walk by. Patricia held a clipboard like a badge of office, her thick arms crossed over her chest. Cheryl sipped a soda through a straw, her expression smug and lazy. When they spotted me, their faces lit with the satisfaction of predators smelling blood. I walked up the path, forcing my voice to remain steady. "We need to talk." Patricia arched an eyebrow. "About what?" "The disaster you called a party." Cheryl snorted. "If that's what you call celebrating, no wonder your neighbors didn't enjoy it." I clenched my jaw, steadying myself. This isn't about parties. This is about my daughter. She's 7 years old. She's in a wheelchair. What you did yesterday wasn't just cruel, it was inhumane. I'm asking you as a father to stop harassing her. Stop making her feel like she doesn't belong here. Patricia leaned forward, her lips curling. Oh, don't get so dramatic. We enforce the rules equally. Wheelchairs tear up the grass. Period. It's not our problem if your kid happens to be in one. Cheryl added, rules are rules. If you don't like it, maybe this neighborhood isn't the place for you. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The sheer indifference in their eyes, the absolute refusal to acknowledge even a shred of compassion, it was like speaking to stone. My hands curled into fists, but I forced myself to remain calm. Losing control here would only give them more ammunition. Fine, I said quietly. Then I'll take this to the HOA directly. Patricia smirked, leaning back in her chair. Be my guest. But you'll find we have plenty of support. People around here care about the rules, not sob stories. Cheryl's laugh followed me down the walkway, thin and sharp like a knife. That evening, the HOA meeting was held in the community center, a beige, lifeless room that smelled faintly of disinfectant. Rows of folding chairs filled with residents, some curious, others clearly anxious. Patricia and Cheryl sat at the front, whispering into each other's ears like gossiping schoolgirls. When my turn came to speak, I stood before the group, explaining what had happened at Emily's party. My voice trembled with controlled anger, but I laid it out plainly. The wheelchair comments, the smashed cake, the humiliation. Before I could finish, Patricia rose from her chair, waving her clipboard like a shield. This man is exaggerating. His child's wheelchair is damaging our community property. We all work hard to keep the lawns pristine, and he thinks his situation makes him exempt. We're here to maintain standards, not bend them. Cheryl held up a stack of printed photos, each showing patches of grass in the park, brown spots, uneven soil. She declared them proof of Emily's destruction. I knew those patches had existed long before, yet the whispers spreading through the crowd told me the sisters' performance was working. A neighbor raised a tentative hand. Well, maybe we should consider if there are designated areas for wheelchairs, just to avoid damage. Another added, the rules are the rules, aren't they? I mean, Patricia and Cheryl have always kept us in line. Their voices chipped away at me, each one driving the knife deeper. I realized in that moment that logic and compassion had no place here. The sisters had spent years weaving their web of control, intimidating anyone who dared resist. I was just the latest target. By the time the meeting ended, the mood had turned against me. A motion to review my family's use of community spaces was passed, thinly veiled as a compromise, but clearly engineered by the sisters. I left the hall with the weight of failure pressing down on me. When I got home, Emily was sitting by the window, staring at the yard. Her wheelchair sat untouched beside her. She didn't look up when I came in. I don't want to go outside anymore, she whispered. My chest tightened. She was 7 years old, and already she was learning what it felt like to be ostracized, to be told she was a problem. I crouched beside her, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. You don't have to listen to them, sweetheart. You belong here as much as anyone. Her eyes shimmered, doubtful. They said I don't. I wanted to tell her that the world was fair, that the good guys always won, but I couldn't. Not yet. The days that followed grew darker. Notes began appearing on my doorstep, written in Patricia's bold scrawl. Respect the grass or leave. Trash was dumped in our yard, the unmistakable smell of rotting food wafting through the air when I opened the door. And one morning, when Emily wheeled herself outside for the first time in days, we discovered her tires deliberately deflated, sharp puncture marks along the rubber. She looked at me with wide, frightened eyes, and I felt something inside me snap. I went back to the HOA president, a timid man named Harris, who had spent his tenure bending to the sisters' will. I showed him the notes, explained the harassment. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, eyes darting toward the window. Look, I sympathize, he muttered. But Patricia and Cheryl, they've been here a long time. They're very influential. I don't want to get involved in personal disputes. Personal disputes? I spat. They destroyed my daughter's birthday cake in front of 20 people. They're vandalizing our property. This isn't a dispute, it's harassment. But he only shook his head. My hands are tied. I tried the police next. The officer at the desk listened politely, then handed me a card. This sounds like a civil matter, sir. Take it up with your HOA. Every door slammed shut. Every authority I turned to recoiled from the fight. Patricia and Cheryl knew this. They knew how to manipulate fear, how to turn neighbors against one another, how to keep their own hands clean while spreading rot through the community. One evening, as I walked back from the mailbox, I saw them across the street. Patricia was laughing, Cheryl whispering in her ear. They didn't even bother hiding their amusement when they saw me watching. Patricia called out, "Careful where you park your car. HOA's very strict about violations." Their laughter trailed behind them like poison in the air. That night, I lay awake listening to the soft hum of Emily's breathing down the hall. My mind replayed every moment, the cake splattering on the grass, her trembling voice asking why they hated her, the smug sneers at the HOA meeting, the deflated tires. Each memory burned hotter until I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I had tried peace. I had tried reason. I had gone to the authorities. And still, the sisters grew bolder, their cruelty unchecked. It became clear to me then I couldn't win by playing their game, not by appealing to rules they had already twisted, not by begging for fairness in a place where fear dictated loyalty. If they wanted to play dirty, then I would show them just how dirty things could get. I whispered the words into the darkness, a vow only I could hear. This ends with me. The house was silent, the neighborhood asleep. But in that silence, something had shifted. I was no longer the man begging for mercy, no longer the father hoping for scraps of compassion. I was a man with nothing left to lose, and a daughter who deserved better than a world ruled by bullies. The sisters thought they had cornered me. They thought they had stripped away every option until all that remained was surrender. But they were wrong. And as I stared into the shadows of my ceiling, a plan began to take shape, one that would turn their arrogance against them, one that would expose every rotten secret they had buried under years of intimidation. The first step would be gathering proof. The second would be patience. And the last step would be their downfall. The clock ticked past midnight. My heart was steady, my resolve unshakable. I had tried everything else. Now it was time to fight on my terms. The war had begun. I began with silence. Silence was the weapon Patricia and Cheryl never understood. They thrived on noise, on gossip, on threats, on their booming voices echoing across driveways. They wanted me rattled, reactive. Instead, I watched. I collected. Every snide remark, every insult hurled at Emily, every moment they sneered from across the street, I recorded it all. My phone became my shield, capturing their arrogance in crisp, undeniable clarity. It didn't take long. Within days, I had video of Patricia pointing at Emily's chair and shouting, "That thing's destroying the lawn." Another of Cheryl muttering to a neighbor, "If that kid can't walk, maybe they should live somewhere else." The footage was raw, ugly, but it was truth. Late at night, after Emily was asleep, I combed through HOA documents. Hours stretched into dawn as I scrolled line by line. And there it was. Nothing, absolutely nothing, banning wheelchairs. Federal law made such a rule impossible. What I did find, buried in financial reports, was more damning. Thousands of dollars marked for beautification projects, with no receipts, no visible improvements. Money siphoned into nothingness. Patricia and Cheryl had been feeding from the trough for years. The pieces of my plan clicked together with a precision that almost frightened me. I didn't need to fight them in backyards or HOA meetings stacked against me. I needed to drag them into the light, expose their cruelty and corruption where no one could deny it. The first step was the video. I posted a clip online, stripped of context except for the truth. Patricia and Cheryl smashing Emily's birthday cake, laughing as children cried. Within hours it spread, the comments flooding in rage, disbelief, promises that justice should find them. By the next morning, neighbors whispered in the streets. By nightfall, the video had gone viral, shared thousands of times. The sisters' names carried far beyond the confines of our cul-de-sac. When I saw them the next day, their smugness had cracked. Patricia barked at me from her porch, but her voice carried an edge of panic. Cheryl avoided eye contact altogether, her usual sneer replaced with tight lips. The HOA scrambled. An emergency meeting was announced, one Patricia and Cheryl could no longer choreograph behind closed doors. Word spread fast. Neighbors who had once hidden behind curtains now prepared to attend, drawn by curiosity and outrage. The night of the meeting, the community hall was packed beyond capacity. Folding chairs ran out. People stood along walls, the air thick with anticipation. At the front, Patricia and Cheryl sat rigid, their neon vests replaced with hastily pressed blouses, as if they believed a change of clothes could erase their sins. I walked to the podium, my phone in hand. My voice was calm, but each word struck like a hammer. For months, my family has endured harassment. My daughter, 7 years old, has been mocked and humiliated. Her wheelchair has been treated as a crime. And last week, her birthday cake was destroyed in front of her friends because Patricia and Cheryl decided she didn't belong on the lawn. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Patricia started to rise, but I held up my hand. You don't need to take my word for it. Watch. I played the videos one by one. Their laughter as they crushed frosting into the grass. Patricia's shrill declarations about rules that never existed. Cheryl whispering her venom. The room filled with stunned silence, broken only by the sisters' own voices echoing from the speakers. When the last clip ended, I didn't stop. I pulled up the financial records, line after line of vanished funds. While they were busy tormenting a child, they were also draining this community dry. Beautification projects that never happened. Money unaccounted for. Thousands gone. The room erupted. Neighbors shouted, some standing to their feet, demanding answers. Patricia stammered, insisting the videos were doctored, the finances a misunderstanding. Cheryl tried to wave her hands, claiming I was out to smear them. But the more they spoke, the more frantic they became, the more their power unraveled before everyone's eyes. Finally, the HOA president, Harris, stood. His voice trembled, but he spoke louder than I had ever heard. Patricia, Cheryl, enough. You've abused your position, and we will no longer tolerate it. The vote was swift, unanimous. The sisters were stripped of their roles, removed from all authority. Whispers of legal action filled the hall, neighbors already discussing filing reports, hiring auditors, demanding restitution. Patricia's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Cheryl buried her head in her hands. For the first time, they looked small. I didn't celebrate, not yet. I turned, meeting the eyes of the neighbors who had once looked away. This was never just about me. Or Emily. It's about all of us. We let fear control us, let bullies dictate our lives. But fear only works when we stay silent. The crowd nodded, some clapping, others murmuring in agreement. The tide had turned. When I returned home that night, Emily was waiting by the window. Her face lit when she saw me. Did you stop them, Daddy? I crouched beside her chair, pulling her into a hug. They can't hurt you anymore. Her arms wrapped tight around my neck, her voice muffled in my shoulder. Good. I didn't want to be scared anymore. 2 days later, the community rallied. Neighbors who had once kept their distance arrived with balloons, gifts, and most importantly, a new cake, bigger, brighter, layered with every color of frosting. They gathered in our yard, stringing fresh decorations, laughing freely for the first time in months. Emily wheeled herself into the center, her smile unrestrained, her laughter filling the air like sunlight. She closed her eyes, made a wish, and blew out the candles while cheers rose around her. This time, there was no interruption. No shadows hovering at the edges. Just joy. Across the street, Patricia and Cheryl's blinds were drawn, but I knew they were watching. Watching as the community they had controlled turned its back on them. watching as their reign crumbled. The irony was delicious. Two women who had obsessed over lawns and appearances now trapped in their own disgrace, their reputations stained beyond repair. Later, I spotted children running across their precious lawn during a game of tag, trampling the grass without a care. No one stopped them. No one scolded. And Patricia, once quick to scream, stood frozen behind the curtain, powerless. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something fundamental had shifted. The sisters had lost their grip, and my daughter had gained her freedom. As the evening wound down, Emily leaned back in her chair, a balloon string wrapped around her wrist. "Daddy," she said softly, "the grass feels better when everyone shares it." I smiled, my chest tightening. She was right. It had never been about the grass. It had been about control, about fear. And now that fear was gone. But as I stood there, watching neighbors mingle and laugh, I couldn't shake the lingering thought. Bullies like Patricia and Cheryl never vanish completely. They lick their wounds, plot in shadows, wait for moments of weakness. The battle was won, but the war of living with people like them, that would always be waiting. And if they ever dared to rise again, I would be ready. Because they had taught me one thing above all else. Silence is their weapon, but truth is mine. And truth is louder than both of them combined.